Welcome to B&W Insights. I'm your host, Mark Seifert, and today we have a very interesting episode. All the way up from the Sunshine State, Jeff Hiscock is going to talk to us about king tides, sea level rise, and how we can protect your community. Ready? Let's get started. Jeff, thank you so much for coming down into the podcast studio today. How was the flight coming up?
Oh, it's fine. Good flight.
Good. I'm glad you brought us some sunshine. I really appreciate it. Want to get right into the topic, and I think there's so much talk in the last 5-6 years about global warming and sea levels rising, but can you talk about what really causes sea levels to rise, and is sea level rise the same everywhere?
Sea level rise is not the same everywhere.
All right.
And I'm not quite sure why, but they have different stations where they're monitoring it, and it's monitored by NOAA. And we have several different studies that we're doing in different areas, and they actually want us to use their gauges.
All right.
And we have to kind of pick at least 2 gauges and pick something, prorated based on that.
So what causes the sea level to rise?
It's caused by, global warming, and there's, still a lot of argument about what's causing that.
Right.
But they believe that's, all the emissions and greenhouse gases. And that's causing, the ice to melt.
All right.
You can see
so
glaciers.
as the polar caps are melting, sea levels starting to rise.
Exactly.
And NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, same guys who are predicting the weather.
That's right.
It's kind of cool that they're looking not only at the weather above us, but also how it's affecting parts of our life.
Sure.
So sea level rise, king tides, same, different. What king tides? I hear about those all the time, especially when I'm on vacation. So what is king tides?
Well, king tides are something that happen anyway.
They
happen because of the alignment of the moon at certain times of the year. We get about 2, maybe 3 king tides a year.
Okay.
And they're different severity depending on where the moon happens to be, how close to the Earth. And it just makes the water higher. I mean, it's kind of giving us an example of what the sea level rise is going to be.
All right.
Because we're seeing more of the king tides in our streets. Wow. So things are coming up a little higher, a little more often, just enough to get into the street. We had some areas where king tide wouldn't bother them for 5 or 10 years.
Right.
And now it's happening every year. So it's just that much of a difference.
So king tides are actually a way that we can see how global warming is going to affect our communities.
Right.
It's our predictor.
It's a wake-up call.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's actually, kind of getting into the next question. I want to talk about the effects of the sea level rising. Mm-hmm. And I've got a couple different areas that I want to talk about what they're affecting. But I think the first thing I want to affect is how does sea level rising affect our environment?
Well, it creates the flooding, which that causes pollution in itself, picking up pollutants and making it dangerous for people to go in the street. There could be, all kinds of things that are, dangerous to walk on that they can't see. The cars drive through it. The cars stall out because of it. They break down, and some of the things in the cars can get into the water. It's just bad all around.
Now, we talk about the sea level rising. You mentioned it gets into the streets, which I'm assuming starts deteriorating the streets.
Right.
It's deteriorating the beachfront. It's deteriorating, seawalls. But talk about the other infrastructure. I assume as the sea level rises, it's backflowing water into our pipes as well.
Right.
Talk about those effects.
Well, that's how it's getting into the streets. It's just backing up, popping out of the inlets, and then going into the streets. So it's very, it's something that not only affecting the streets, but it affects the other assets that the cities or towns have. And they're doing studies now. We've done several of them. They're called vulnerability assessments.
All right.
And the state is paying for those studies, giving the money to the town, and then they're having us do the assessment. And it's where we look at all the assets that town may have, like lift stations, anything that could be affected. And based on different predictions, like NOAA also has predictions of where they think things are going to be.
Okay.
And they're looking at 2050 and 2080. and different severity predictions. So we have all these different mixes of things they want us to look at. Then they also want a scenario with king tides on top of that. So it all adds up, and they want to know what is the vulnerability of each of these assets, how much is that going to affect that town or city, and how much is that going to cost. And then we go into developing projects, and they start funding those as well.
So these vulnerability assessments really are helping not only the state and the community see what are the potential effects to the infrastructure, but it's also setting a roadmap to protect infrastructure, right?
Exactly.
And obviously, when we're talking about vulnerability, a lot of this infrastructure is super critical, not only during king tides but during any rain event.
Right.
So if you lose one of those pieces of infrastructure, it has a long-lasting effect, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we talked a little. You touched on preparedness. When does a community know they need to start working and looking at sea level rise and vulnerability? Is this a mandate that's going across, or is it almost it's here?
I mean, it is here, and it's affecting the coastal communities.
Mm-hmm.
And it also affects the rainfall intensity is increasing as a result of global warming as well. It's just creating more rainfall.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to consider that into our future predictions as well. So there's going to be more flooding. I mean, that's a given. And what we need to do is plan in the future to how we're going to deal with that. Like a lot of our stormwater master plans now, all of them basically are taking that into consideration. So even if we need some stormwater improvements now and don't need a pump station yet, we want to make sure that we design so that a pump station will work with those improvements in the future.
Right. Especially in Florida, in some of the urbanized areas, mm-hmm. there's a lot of room for growth. In some of these built out areas, you're having to build stormwater and infrastructure where it already is. It's not like you have clear open land in everywhere, right?
Right. We are basically replacing a lot of the infrastructure now anyway, because a lot of the areas that we're working in, where we have projects, those areas were built in the 60s, maybe 50s. Mm-hmm. They didn't think much about standards and how, to keep the roads dry in the first place.
Right.
So they're undersized. And then they've also got, the age of the facility itself. It's got to be replaced. But they didn't plan with lakes and where water could be stored.
Right.
And so we've got to take all that into consideration. That's a big part of what we do is designing retrofit projects.
Right. And because you're not designing new at this point. It's you're taking, right. It's a little different if you're building a new subdivision.
Exactly.
But now you're combating growth in infrastructure, growth in sea level rise, more mm-hmm. rain. It's really a combination of factors, right?
Yeah, it's all coming in like it's in a perfect storm, literally.
Literally. So, NOAA's looking at the future of sea level rise. Do you know about what they're predicting, how much more it's going to rise in the next 20, 30, 40 years? Or
they're all different, their predictions. Mm-hmm. 2050, the high prediction's about 2 feet.
Wow.
So but the low is less than 1. It's
that's still, when you're at a beach and usually when you're at the road looking out at the beach, the sand is pretty flat. It's not like when you're up here in the north and you're looking down over a cliff or into a lake or something. It's 2 feet's a lot.
Yeah.
Now, how much does up here in the northern states, we have clay and shale and mm-hmm. some real impervious soils.
Yeah.
Florida's built on sand.
Yeah.
It's a swamp.
Or sandy.
How does that soil contribute to you trying to get water away and water movement? And how does that soil really affect you?
The soil actually helps by having, the type of soils that we have, they store a lot of water. Mm-hmm. And that's another issue with sea level rise because the groundwater is also going to come up with the sea. Mm-hmm. So that provides less of a depth between ground and the water table.
So less of a cushion.
Less of a storage.
Yeah.
Because we put that in our calculations, how much soil storage there is, how much can the soil absorb during a storm. So that's going to become less also.
So really the sand you probably used to help a lot more. Now it's almost a detriment because you don't have that storage that you had for the last 30, 40 years in all of your calculations.
Yeah, exactly.
What can we do, as an engineering firm and as engineers and, people listening to this podcast, to combat sea level rise? Obviously is combating global warming. But what can you do in design projects that, as you look towards the future, to help combat sea level rise and some of the backwater in?
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what we're starting now with the vulnerability assessments.
Okay.
And then there's adaptation plans that will follow that. And they're going to assess, the water system, how efficient the water system is, how efficient the energy system is, do an assessment on greenhouse gases for the municipalities' infrastructure, their treatment plants. What is the collective amount of greenhouse gas that they are passing up into the atmosphere, and how can they curb that? That's like the next step. So that's now starting to attack the cause.
Mm-hmm. And really, by attacking the cause, hopefully we can
slow it down
at least some, because eventually you just have to put larger and larger pipes in, and that doesn't work for.
You got to put pump stations. Yeah. You got to put high seawalls. You got to do all that, and it's eventually going to overcome all that.
Well, so I'm glad you mentioned pump stations and seawalls. How has technology and innovation helped combat sea level rise? Maybe not from stopping global warming, but is there anything that we're building that can kind of slow down the water coming back as fast as it is?
One of the things is we have an intracoastal waterway, and the Corps of Engineers is looking at the possibility of putting in some type of tidal control structures. We have our outlets. I'm sure the boats aren't going to like that, but that's going to be, I think, a line of defense in years to come. Okay. And they're starting to look at that possibility. In the meantime, we've got to look upstream. What can we do to protect these people with their, it's probably going to be a lot of different stormwater pump stations. All right. And make sure that they work.
Like they should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and when you talk stormwater pump stations, I assume a lot of times you guys need the flexibility. If it's, everybody listening probably has been to Florida, and it's historically every day at 3:00 it rains. Yeah. But not everywhere. So sometimes you probably need to move water from one part of the city to the other, or move around. And talk a little about that flexibility that you're having to install with pump stations to, kind of maneuver and navigate the water.
Yeah, pump stations have been a part of the stormwater master system in South Florida for decades. And I've done several of them at different locations, some on the town of Palm Beach and some further out in the Everglades. It's a way to control water, and a very quick way to control it. It doesn't matter what the elevation is downstream, it's going to pump this constant rate of flow. And so you get a lot of control with that. And it's the best thing in this case for sea level rise, I believe. We've had to do one so far for sea level rise, rather than say, okay, we're going to increase your pipes, and in 10 years you need a pump station. We went ahead and did it now because in that case they were flooding constantly. Right. And they were getting a lot of flow also from other areas that were coming down into that low area. And they've had a lot of major storm events, and they just flood. Yeah. So we said, we're putting the pump station in now.
And everything, you've mentioned inevitably costs money. Right. So I believe earlier in the conversation you mentioned the state's helping pay for some of the funds. Right. Is there any other funding mechanisms out there that can help communities pay for this? Because I assume this is not something that they all have had in their budgets for years. They're probably all reacting right now.
Right. Yeah. It's there's a lot of different sources for funding. A lot of it's state and a lot of it's federal. And some of the federal money is going to the state for the state to administer. And one of the big ones has been a hazard mitigation grant. Okay. And they're usually tied in with a hurricane that came through. This is the Hurricane Ian Fund. They have a pot of money, but it's being distributed through the hazard mitigation grant program. And they give that to the state, FDEP.
And the Florida Department of
Environmental Protection.
All right. I had the Florida Department. I wanted to make sure on the last two.
Yep. So what we do in that case is look at the damage that occurs would occur currently with a certain storm event or several different storm events, and then look at the difference after we put these improvements in. And we're actually calculating the damages that there would be towards, the roads and the buildings.
Wow.
And yeah, they have a whole big process of how to calculate that. So it justifies getting grant money. And then that grant money, can be used for the whole project. We have a project in the town of Lake Park that we got $3.2 million of hazard mitigation grant.
Wow.
But we only probably needed $1 million to do the stormwater part of it. And they went ahead and did a beautification of the roadway. And we also did a bioswale, like some green infrastructure along with that project. And it's just, it turned out to be, a great project for everybody.
So when you talk about looking at the issues that are going on with multiple different storms, are you modeling that, or is that just eyes on the ground, seeing what actually happened?
Nope, we're modeling it. And when you're talking about innovation, I'd say probably the best tool that we've had so far has been the LiDAR.
Yeah, right.
Don't remember the acronym.
I don't think anyone knows. It's a lot of dots that are on the map. So we have better maps.
They're flying over. They're using lasers, and they're measuring the time that it takes for that light to bounce back, so that they can get an idea of how high the ground is at that point. And they're doing millions of points, like you said. Yeah. So it's very accurate information. It doesn't go through the water, but we don't need it to.
Now, being in such a sandy soil, does the topography change more in Florida than it would on a more stable soil up here, or how does that affect the stormwater modeling?
I mean, we typically have coastal ridges in Florida. So somewhere along that area, there's going to be ridges that just look like wrinkles. They're not very high.
Right.
About 20 feet maybe.
Right.
But then it's just pretty flat. But even flat, it's a gradual change.
Right. So you mentioned it, and hurricane season is going to be coming up here shortly. And as a weather nerd myself, I've noticed an increase in both frequency and, the impacts of hurricanes throughout the South and Southeast. I assume you're looking at the correlation between hurricanes and sea level rise and the destruction. Talk a little bit about how these hurricanes are changing in frequency and impacts due to sea level rise a little bit.
Well, that's a weather thing, but I know what you mean. I follow it probably the same way you do.
Right.
It's just we know it's happening. We can speculate why. They believe it's because the ocean temperatures are rising. That's where this water is coming from.
Right.
With these low systems, it's pulling that moisture up.
And what can we do because I assume as you're working on your stormwater modeling, we talk in rain events up here, we're talking about the 100-year storm, the 500-year storm. And now that 100-year storm seems like it's coming yearly.
Yeah.
So are you modeling how much rain's coming in hurricanes as well?
Hurricanes that's another thing. We have, like you said, a 100-year storm, 500-year storm. 25 is usually our design storm.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily associated with a hurricane.
Right.
That could just be a weather system coming through.
Wow.
Sometimes they do correlate.
Yeah, but I'm sure when you see a community that's got 2, 3, 4 foot of water, and it's after they're not even near the eye of the hurricane, they're 200 miles away. Some of this grant money starts funneling in. These are where we need to look at projects and say, how could we get this water away faster, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I did some research, and I saw average rainfall in Florida is between 50 to 70 inches per year. And raining over 100 days per year. Over a third of the days, a little around a third of the days, it's raining. How are communities starting to plan for this increased rainfall rates as well on top of sea level rise?
The only way that they are is through what we're doing through regulation.
Okay.
They are requiring now that new developments use higher thresholds for rainfall, and also the groundwater storage. They want them to consider that there's going to be a change in the groundwater elevation.
Right.
So anything new that's being permitted now has got to deal with that.
So as we look at, new regulations coming out in the state of Florida, is there anything that communities should be looking out for in the next year or two? Or should they be all working on hazard mitigation right now and then moving forward?
I think we're on the right track, looking for where we're vulnerable, and then getting the grant money to fix those vulnerabilities.
All right.
And I think that's about all we can do at this point. I mean, it's every community. I think people should probably look to their local government, if they're whatever city or town they're in, and see what they're doing, because they're not required to do this, and they probably should be.
Right. Planning is going to help them just down the line as sea level continues to rise, as storms become more frequent. Planning now is going to help them, and I know a big part in Florida is the insurance and home insurance, and that's just going to help with insurance rates and being insured, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So I want to thank you for coming up and bringing us warm weather. I truly appreciate it. This has been really interesting, and I definitely, after this podcast, I'm going to have 100 more questions for you. But thanks for coming on.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
For our entire team here at Baxter Woodman, listen, subscribe, share this podcast. You don't want to miss an insight.